Mysterious, isn't it? The things that call to us from the unseen world. Some rush past you as faint whispers in the wind, easily ignored. But then there are those that snatch your breath, draw you in like a doomed moth to a flame. Let me take you on a journey, one that is not for the faint of heart. This is the tale of the luring melody. In the heart of a bustling, rain-slick city, hidden down a labyrinth of narrow cobblestone alleys, there existed a curiously nondescript shop. Carved into the wooden sign hanging above its door were two simple words: Final Note. It was a music store notorious for two things: its cluttered interiors packed wall-to-wall with antique instruments, and its reclusive owner, a man only known as Solon. Physically unremarkable, Solon had an air about him that chilled your blood without you ever understanding why. Nobody ever saw him outside the store, and yet, whispers claimed his instruments could play melodies that allowed people to hear their deepest desires within the music. Some customers spoke of seeing snippets of their futures. Others described feeling a rush of unparalleled euphoria. But as you can guess, not all of them came out unscathed. Olivia Turner was not the type to believe in such fantasies. A violinist in the symphony, she lived for logic and the sharp clarity of a written score. For Olivia, music was math. The exactitude of it pleased her. Until that fateful evening. The night began like so many for her, leaving a late rehearsal under the shadow of a brooding storm, when a violent gust of wind, slicing through her umbrella, drove her into the first available doorway for shelter. The sign above it read, Final Note. The smell of aged wood and damp varnish hit her as soon as she stepped inside. The store appeared far larger than its facade suggested. The shelves wove infinitely, stacked high with ancient violins, brass instruments tarnished with time, and sheet music so faded they could have belonged to Mozart himself. At the center of this maze stood Solon, a withered man with piercing blue eyes, hunched over a harp and plucking at its strings. He didn't look up but addressed her immediately, as if he'd felt her presence before she even entered. "You're late, Olivia," he murmured, "but the song has waited." A shiver crawled down her spine. "How do you know my name?" she whispered, but Solon had already turned away. He placed a bow gently on the counter, an eerily beautiful violin bow adorned with dark engravings that twisted and turned like vines. "This," he said without looking at her, "is not meant for everyone. You, on the other hand, might be the exception." "I don't need another bow," she said firmly, but she couldn't stop staring at it. It beckoned her in an uncomfortable, inexplicable way. Solon raised an eyebrow, tapping his fingers rhythmically on the counter. It was as though he knew already what she would say next. "How much is it?" The old man smiled for the first time, showing great rows of 2 white teeth. "No money," he crooned. "Only an agreement. Somebody must listen to the song it plays. That's all." The storm outside cracked wildly as the deal was struck. No paper, no signature. Olivia simply walked out with it in her hands, leaving behind the chill of Solon's burning stare piercing her back. For days, Olivia couldn't bring herself to touch the bow. Though outwardly composed, she felt frayed within, like a violin string wound too tight and on the verge of snapping. Oddly, the bow never appeared in the place she last left it. It moved. It followed her from room to room. She heard faint notes, like a ghostly player practicing in the dead of night. Yet, when she entered the room, silence always greeted her. At last, she gave in. Late at night, when the city rested and seemed less daunting, she picked up her violin, slid the bow across its strings, and began to play. The first note that filled her rented apartment was unlike anything Olivia had ever heard before. It was alive. It slid along her skin like a sharp whisper, burrowing into her ears and then deeper, lodging into her chest where her heartbeat faltered with the rhythm. She should have stopped. Any sensible person would have. but she couldn't put it down. The room changed. Shadows elongated unnaturally. Cold crept in waves, like icy water pouring over her shoulders. She saw her own reflection in the window, only it wasn't her. Her eyes stared back, unfamiliar and void-like, the corners of her lips upturned in a grin she did not feel herself making. And still, she played, faster and faster, possessed, until the melody seemed to engulf not just her, but the entire world. And through the sound, faint at first, but growing louder, she began to hear someone whispering. Words formed in broken pieces. "Play for us. Play for freedom." The whispers swirled around her, cacophonous yet harmonious. Her body felt suffused by something overwhelming, something unnatural. Her hands ached, bled, yet they refused to let go of the bow. That's when she saw them. Figures materializing from nothing, clothed in shadow so thick it seemed to absorb light. Their faces were wrong, malformed, pieces unmapped by coincidence, yet horrifyingly familiar. She wanted to stop, but knew if she did, the figures, these ghastly half-human things, would cross the thinning boundary between her world and theirs. "Not yet," one rasped from its hollow mouth. "The song isn't finished, and neither are we." But there was no end to the song. As long as she played for herself, they remained motionless. But playing for them, it meant surrender. In a moment of clarity, Olivia lunged, intending to snap the cursed bow in two. But just as it split in her hands, the figures shrieked, ear-piercing, chilling cries, before dissolving back into the dark. The strains of their whispers lingered long after they vanished, promising, "This is not the end." The next morning, Olivia found herself seated in front of the violin case, fingers trembling, and bow splintered into harmless fragments, or so it seemed. Filled with dread, she sought out Solan's store, intent on returning the tainted artifact no matter the cost. But when she retraced her steps back to that cursed alley, there was nothing but a blank brick wall where Final Note should have been. Gone, as if it never existed. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling she'd only just played the prologue of something far more sinister. And so, dear listener, we leave Olivia frozen in time's grasp, staring at the shards in her hands, and hoping they end the story instead of prolonging it. But hope, like music, has limits, doesn't it? If you happen to hear faint strains of violin while walking alone, beware. It may be your final note.